When you first start woodworking, you may not have a table saw, and one of the most difficult cuts to make is a cross cut or a rip cut. And today we're going to take a look at 5 different ways to make these cuts, from beginner level all the way up to pro level. Now, when I look back to when I first started woodworking, a table saw was a real luxury. All I had in my inventory was a circular saw. And maybe you're like I was right now. You haven't decided to pull the trigger on a table saw, but you still want to do some woodworking. And the cool thing about woodworking is you can build some amazing projects right now with some simple tools. But in order to do even some simple projects, we need one fundamental skill, and that's the ability to cut a straight line. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. So let's get started and go over the most fundamental way to cut a straight line with a circular saw. And this method is also one of the most cheap methods, coming in at today's prices of just $3.99. And you guessed it, all you're going to need is a 2x4, but not just any 2x4, a straight 2x4. And this is where you're going to have to spend just a little bit more time at the lumberyard. Dig through that stack of 2x4s and find the straightest one you can and pull it off the rack. Once you have it off the rack, it's now time to look down the length of the board. And what you're looking for is a straight line on both sides. It's also a good idea to look down the board vertically, as you want this 2x4 to be as straight as possible. Once you're satisfied with your 2x4, you instantly have one of the easiest ways to cross-cut and rip your lumber. The only other tools you need is obviously your circular saw and a couple of clamps. You'll then take your circular saw and measure the distance from the edge of the faceplate to the blade of the saw. But the distance for yours may be different, so you want to do that measurement. Once you have the marking for where you want to make your cut, you simply measure over 1.25 inches. And once you've done this on both sides of the piece of wood you want to cut, you're ready to move on to the next step, which is to simply take your 2x4 and line it up with those 1.25 inch markings and clamp it down to your workpiece. And with both sides of your 2x4 clamped to your workpiece, you now have a fence that your circular saw can ride on, giving you just enough support to cut that straight line. Giving you a huge amount of straight cut capacity with just a simple 2x4 and a couple of clamps. And an even better way to do this is to use anything with a straight flat surface. A level can be a perfect option. Or you could even use something like the factory edge of a sheet of plywood. And even though the factory edges may not be perfectly square, it is accurate enough for this purpose. Now, even though the 2x4 level and plywood method will work, wouldn't it be nice not to have to make that adjustment for the distance between the faceplate on the saw and the blade? Well, that's exactly what our second method is all about. Let's take a look at it. And this is probably one of the most simple jigs you'll ever see. In fact, I only needed my circular saw to rip this scrap piece of 1/2 inch plywood into 2 pieces. And the dimensions of these pieces of plywood really don't have to be exact. Both of my pieces are about 2 feet long, but these can be as long as you want. My wider piece is about 15 inches wide, and my thinner piece is about 5 inches wide. All I'm going to do is add a little bit of wood glue to the thinner strip of plywood. Then I'm going to take that plywood and flip it around about 2 inches from the edge of the wider piece of plywood. Now, to expedite this process, I'm just going to throw a couple of brad nails into the top, but you don't need to do this. You can just let that glue set up. Now that we have both pieces laminated together, I now want to grab my circular saw and make my first cut with the jig. And before we make our first cut, you'll see exactly why I left that 2-inch offset. These are for your clamps so that you can attach your material. Now, the first cut that we're going to make is actually going to be in the jig itself. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So you probably already guessed, but just like the 2x4 did in the previous example, this little scrap piece of plywood is going to create a fence for our circular saw. And we're going to use that little fence to create our first cut, but this time we're not going to reference the side that's closest to the blade, but the side that's furthest from the blade. This will allow the circular saw to still be supported even though this small piece is cut away. So let's go ahead and make our initial cut into the jig itself. With our first cut made, this jig is entirely complete. Let me show you how we're going to use this. Instead of having to make all sorts of measurements to make sure our blade hits exactly where we want to cut, we've essentially made a track saw. All we need to do is to line up our jig exactly where we want to make our cut. And once our jig is aligned, we can then clamp it into place. Then it's just a matter of placing our saw onto the jig and making the cut. And just like you see with a track saw, you can see how perfectly aligned that cut is with the jig, making this an easy, accurate, cheap alternative to any track saw. Well, that takes us through 2 beginner-friendly ways to make straight cuts with your circular saw. Now let's move on to the third method. Now for the third method, you're going to need to spend just a little bit of money, but frankly, not that much when you compare it to the cost of a track saw. Now this system is the Milescraft Track Saw Guide, and it costs about $100. Now we're not going to dig too deep into this method, as I have a whole video where we dig into the details about this tool. But I do want to cover the basics and show you exactly how this tool works. So this is a track guide system that's designed to work with your current circular saw versus having to buy a track saw. So let's take a quick look at what comes with this $100 system. And there really is quite a bit that comes with this system. You're going to get 2 pieces of 27.5-inch track that can be placed together for 55 inches. You also get the red track saw guide as well as a saw blade spacer. And lastly, you'll get 2 track clamps. So let me quickly show you how this item is used with your circular saw. First, you'll place your saw blade spacer onto the edge of a flat surface. Then you'll carefully place the track saw guide right on top. You'll then take your circular saw with the blade guard lifted and place it right on top of that track guide. Then you'll attach the saw with the 4 clamps that are around the perimeter of the track guide. With your circular saw now attached to the track guide, you're ready to make some cuts. First, you'll place your track onto your workpiece, aligning the edge of the track with your cut line. Then you'll secure your track to the workpiece with the 2 included track clamps. And these clamps just slide into the T-slot on the end of your track and lock into place with the twist of the knob. And with your track secure, you can place your track guide onto that track and make your cut. And just like with the high-end track saw, you have a cut that's completely flush with the track. Now I know I went through this option rather quickly, so if you're interested in more details about this track guide system, check out this video here and I'll leave a link in the description below so that you can learn more information. Well, that takes us through our first 3 options and only 2 more left to go. Before we move on to our 4th, I ask you to do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, leave a like and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, if you're interested in some fun woodworking accessories like all the t-shirts that I wear in my videos, check out my website www.flynndogwoodwork.com. But most importantly, if you're just starting out woodworking, I'm hoping you're learning there's a lot of cheap ways to make some straight cuts. So let's get on to method number 4, which is a brand new tool for me which I haven't even taken out of the box. And this is the first true track saw of the day, but it's an affordable one, coming in with all the accessories for less than $170. This is the Wen track saw. I really wish I would have known about this one when I was just starting out. Now that $170 is for the track saw kit, which comes with a track saw, 2 pieces of 55-inch track, as well as 2 track clamps. Now for me, I already had the track and the track saw clamp, so I just had to buy the saw. And believe it or not, this saw by itself is less than $90. So let's get this saw out of the box and take a look at everything. So with this 6.5-inch track saw, you're going to get the track saw itself along with a 5mm hex wrench, and this has got onboard storage. It also comes with 2 carbon brushes as well as a dust port adapter. And if you get the kit for $170, you're also going to get 2 55-inch tracks that you can attach together with the included hardware as well as 2 track clamps. And if you're curious, the Wen track is completely compatible with Festool track, so it's a much more affordable option. Now since my experience with the track saw has been almost entirely with Festool, there's one thing that I noticed about the Wen saw when I took it out of the box. There's a lot of knobs and adjustments with this track saw, as you can see them all in orange. This thing may even have more adjustments than my Festool saw, but let's take a quick look at what they do. Let's start off at the bottom with these 4 knobs on the base. The 2 knobs on the exterior of the saw are called fine adjustment knobs. By twisting these knobs, you can make micro adjustments to reduce the play on the track. The next knob is for the track lock. By pulling up on the knob and twisting it, you can lock the saw to the track. And the last knob is called the anti-kickback knob. This knob needs to be rotated to place the saw on the track and prevents backward movement. If we look at the front and the back of the saw, you're also going to notice 2 more adjustment knobs. These are called bevel lock knobs. By loosening them, you can adjust the bevel from 90 degrees all the way up to 45. And once you have your angle dialed in, all you need to do is to twist the knob to lock it into place. If we look on the interior of the saw, we'll find the depth adjustment knob. By twisting this knob and setting it to your desired depth, you can create a plunge stop for the saw. Now I'll have to say for both the bevel scale and the depth scale, it's very hard to read with the black writing. But I have to remember this is a $90 track saw, which is a heck of a bargain. Now with the depth stop, there's a little tab that you flip up when you're not using a track, and you flip down when you are using a track. This little tab just reduces the depth of your plunge by the thickness of the track. Now let's take a look at what's going on up by the handle. The handle really only has two buttons, the plunge lock button as well as the power trigger. Near the handle, you'll find the spindle lock, and this is used to lock the saw when changing out your blade. In front of that spindle lock, you'll also find 3 mode selections. Let's take a look at those. The first mode is the blade change mode. The second mode is the free plunge mode, and the one you'll probably use the most. And the last one is the scribe cut. Now, if you've ever owned a track saw, you'll know that one thing that's very important is dust collection. Now, although probably not important for everyone, it is important for me that my tools take a Festool dust collection. But it does come with an adapter for both 35mm as well as 39.5mm hoses. And that about covers all the features of this $90 track saw. The only thing left to do is to see how it cuts. So I'll first take my track and line it up with our cut line. Then we'll lock it into place with our 2 Wen track clamps. Then we'll place our saw onto the track by twisting the anti-kickback knob, attach our dust collection, plug it in, and make our cut. And that cut is just as flush as any other high-end track saw. And coming from somebody that's used Festool his entire life, I am blown away by this tool. Especially since this kit only cost $170, and this is very close to the functionality that you get with that Festool. Now, is the Festool a better saw? Absolutely. However, you're not going to get into the track saw game at a better value. Well, that's going to take us through 4 methods of getting a straight cut with your saw, all the way from the beginner level of using a 2x4 and a circular saw, all the way up to this intermediate level using a Wen track saw. But we need to take a look at one more option, and that's the pro level option. And this is an option that I thought was the only way to go if you wanted to be a serious woodworker. But as we've already seen, there's a lot of other options out there, and if you haven't guessed already, we're talking about the Festool track saw. So what makes this amazing saw pro level? Well, first of all, it's the price. Seriously, this thing is expensive. But that price really reflects your ability to dial in the accuracy of all your cuts. So let's quickly dive into some of my favorite features. The first thing that you'll notice is all the measurements are much easier to read with the white writing and the black background. And the layout for adjusting the depth and the angles with this saw are similar to the Wen with just a little bit more precision. If we look at the depth stop, you can see it's very easy to read and easy to adjust. If you simply depress the button on the right-hand side, you can easily adjust your depth. There's also a cutting depth adjustment screw for reconditioned saw blades. If we look at the angle adjustments with this saw, it goes all the way from -1 degrees up to 47 degrees. And it even allows you a -1 degree adjustment with just a flip of this tab. And in the same fashion as the Wen, those angles are locked into place with just a twist of the knob in the front and the back of the saw. If we look at the faceplate of the saw, you'll notice 2 little green knobs. These knobs allow you to secure the saw to the track and reduce the play. If we look at the handle, you'll see there's a lock button as well as a power trigger. And there's also a fast fix button that opens up to expose the hardware to change the blade. If we look at the frame of the saw, you'll notice that there's something on this saw that the Wen just didn't have. And that is a speed adjustment knob. You can adjust this speed from 1, which is its lowest setting, all the way up to 6, which is its highest setting. On the front of the saw is a viewing window and chip guard so that you can be assured you're starting your cut exactly where you want. And if we look at the back of the blade, you'll notice a feature that's all about safety. Not only does this little knob act as a wedge or a splitter, but it's also an anti-kickback sensor. And that kickback sensor can be turned on and off with a simple press of a button on the frame of the tool. Now you may have noticed that this saw is cordless, and part of the higher price of this tool has to do with their unique battery system. The 2 5.2 amp hour batteries that come with the tool have Bluetooth connectivity, but it's not to connect to your phone. This Bluetooth connectivity is all about connecting to your dust collector. And you'll need to have a Festool dust collector for this to work. You simply press the pairing mode on the dust collection system, and the 2 batteries will pair and automatically send a signal to the dust collector and initiate the dust collector once you start the saw. This saw also has 2 different configurations for the batteries. And you can see from the diagram on the frame, it's got hare and tortoise mode, with the slower setting being with one battery attached to the bottom of the saw and the faster setting being with both batteries attached. And that about covers all the features of this high-end saw. The only thing left to do is to make our final cut. So we'll take our track and line it up with our cut line, attach that track with 2 track clamps that are not included with the set, add our track saw, and make our final cut. And just like we expected, we're once again getting smooth, clean, accurate results. Well, I really hope you enjoyed going through these 5 different levels for making straight cuts in your shop, all the way from beginner level up to the pro level. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, check out my website, FlynnDoggWoodwork.com. There you can find some fun woodworking accessories like all the t-shirts that I wear in my videos. Until next time, take care as always. After seeing this video, I'm realizing my saws are so old, I'm not even sure they're saws. They might be scenes.